In the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, in chapter 6, God looks out over all the wickedness of the world. People are doing things without any regards to if it displeases God, if it hurts themselves, or if it hurts anybody else. Does that sound like something people sometimes do today? Back then, God wiped out all of creation by a flood, except for Noah and his family, and an ark that rode on top of those waters. Now granted, Noah and his family was safe from ultimate destruction, but you know he had to have been laughed at before the flood. Think about it this way, when you look at that text, they had never had rain. They had never had anything like this. They didn't have flooding. Water resided on the grass in the morning like we have the morning dew. Water came up underneath the ground like we have groundwater, but they had never seen anything like this. So think about how we might think it odd to see a doomsday prepper that's got the bomb shelter underneath the house with the pallet upon pallets of canned meat and bottled water. We might say, oh, that's a little paranoid. That's a little bit much. But imagine what they said about Noah when he's out there building that ark. It's going to rain. Oh, what's raining? Imagine what they said to him and how they treated him. And of course, then the flood came. And Noah and some of his family survives. And after that, Noah builds a vineyard. He's experimenting with this. He's trying to get society established again. He's making a vineyard, and he's experimenting with it, and he gets drunk. He passes out drunk. And I always wonder, to what extent was it he just didn't know what he was doing? He was experimenting versus to what extent he was dealing with seeing all of creation destroyed. I don't know, and I certainly mean no disrespect to Noah. But I always wonder when I read that story, how much of this was, I don't know what I'm doing, versus how much of this is, well, I kind of have an idea what I'm doing. But I've seen everybody I know die except for this group full of people. And Noah would definitely have the right to be referred to as someone who had PTSD when you've seen all of creation destroyed. And what does that do to somebody? Now, after the flood, we've gone through chapter 6 of Genesis all the way to chapter 9. After the flood, God makes a covenant with Noah, and he puts his rainbow in the sky. Now, I believe that rainbows are often misunderstood. I'm a child of the 80s. Now, I remember going to class in the 80s, and all the girls had what? Y'all remember? Lisa Frank notebooks. The teachers might have seen these. Yeah, all the pencils and all the folders and trapper keepers and whatever. I don't know. I didn't keep up with it. But everything was bright pinks and purples, rainbow, sunshine, and lollipops everywhere. And unicorns jumping over rainbows, all that kind of stuff. Now, if you watch cartoons, which I did do that, I watched Saturday morning cartoons, you know that unicorns jump over rainbows, or they reside near rainbows or something. Or, how about this one? At the end of every rainbow was what? Pot of gold. See, y'all all knew that one. At the end of every rainbow was a pot of gold, and if you saw the Saturday morning cartoon commercials, then there was like the Lucky Charms guy trying to keep the kids from stealing his cereal. All he wanted to do was eat breakfast, but they kept stealing the cereal. Now, as I get older, I saw rainbows misappropriated to stand for things less innocent than selling cereal or trapper keepers. It was used to represent some things God would not have approved of. And now with a deeper understanding of what the rainbow means, I can't help but see some irony. So yes, the rainbow is beautiful. But you see, the rainbow, as we think about it, it's not like a ribbon wrapped around a present. When I think about the rainbow, or at least I did, when I used to think about the rainbow, I thought about it as a beautiful thing like you might wrap a bow around a present. It's not that kind of bow. It's the kind of bow that's a weapon. It's saying, essentially, God has a weapon that he wants used to send a flood to kill everybody on earth except for a small handful of people. That's the kind of weapon that God has at his disposal. And he lays it on the sky. Some translations say he lays it upon the firmament. Picture it this way. Picture if all of creation was inside of a snow globe. And then one day God takes that snow globe and shakes it up and down and puts it back. and you're one of the few people that survive, you're still traumatized by that can happen. But then let's say God says, for our intents and purposes with our modern weapons, God lays a pistol across the snow globe. You don't look at that and say, wow, that's beautiful. You would go, God had a really big gun. And that's kind of intimidating. And he says, this is my covenant to you. I will never destroy the whole earth with this particular weapon. What would you think and say, well, what else you got? What other kind of weapons do you have? Because when God makes his covenant to Noah, it says, I will never again destroy the whole earth. Doesn't mean he won't destroy a lot of it, but he won't destroy the whole earth. And I will never do it with a flood. That does not mean that God will never destroy again. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have any other weapons in his disposal. He says, I'm not going to use this one. So when we look at the rainbow and say, yes, that is beautiful and that is lovely, but we also remember that God has at his disposal the ability to bring destruction at any moment. We don't know when he's returning. We just know that he's not going to use that particular weapon again. So if you're a child of God, if you live under the promise of God, you say, I've been saved by God, I've accepted the sacrifice for my sins on the cross, I'm a child of God, then you can look at that rainbow and say, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. God's covenant with man, he's not going to use this weapon again. I don't have to worry about it. But if you know the story and you believe it, but you don't have that relationship with God, you say, I believe all this stuff happened, but I just don't want to follow God, then it should be a terrifying thing. Because for you, it's not a ribbon wrapped around a present, it's a reminder. These are the kind of weapons God has. When he returns, whatever day that is, don't you want to be in his family? When he returns for his own, what side of the weapon do you want to be on? Do you want to be in the family of God? Or do you want to be among the wicked that get destroyed? I'm a firm believer, and you teachers can back me up, if you don't study history, what happens? It repeats itself. If you don't learn from mistakes, not necessarily your mistakes, but I firmly believe it's great if you can learn from your mistakes, but if you can learn from someone else's mistakes, it's a lot less painful. Believe me. So if you can learn through history about other people's mistakes and say, I don't want to make those same mistakes. We see God wipes out the wicked, but he spares a few righteous people, then we should say, well, I don't want to be in the wicked category. I want to be among those who are saved by God that next time around, because he says he's coming back. So in the first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 6, we learn that the wicked are allowed to thrive. God lets them stay for a long time. They think they're really successful, but eventually they're wiped out. And the last book of the Bible, Revelation chapter 6, ironically enough, we learn that God will return one day and destruction is coming. So the first book of the Bible, Noah, listen up. Destruction is coming, chapter 6. Last book of the Bible, John, listen up. Destruction is coming, chapter 6. And so maybe I'm overthinking this, that these both occur at the beginning of creation book and the end of established creation book in chapter 6. But consider this. Man's number is 5. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but man's number is 5. Think about it. You have 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes on each foot, I hope. For most of us, we have 5 fingers on each hand, so man's number is 5. God's number is 7. 7 means perfection. It means completeness. We read later on in Revelation that God will seal his followers with the number 777. So it's completeness, completeness, completeness. Perfection, perfection, perfection. So man's number is 5, God's number is 7. The devil's number is 6. And he's going to seal his followers with the number 666. So we know that this is man, this is God, but the devil tries to get in between God and man. That's how you remember that, is that the devil always tries to get in between God and man. So in these two books, the very beginning and the very end, both in chapter 6, we see what happens when the devil tries to stand in between God and man. And it's destruction. We'll start in Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. So we've been talking for the last few weeks about Revelation, and if you haven't been here for all of that, don't worry, it's confusing no matter where you jump in. And we're going to explain some of the symbolism that happens here. It can be very difficult to keep up with the imagery here, so we're explaining this. In the scene we are right now, we are at the throne room of God. And God the Father is sitting on his throne. He's got 24 golden thrones around him with the elders sitting on it. Some scholars think that that's the 12 tribes of Israel and then the 12 groups of people that were not from the Jewish bloodline, but they are followers of Jesus. And everybody has a seat around God's throne. So the living creatures of different types of species and categories are all there. All of creation is gathered around God's throne. And God the Father has a scroll. And the only one worthy of opening that scroll and seeing what's written inside of it, what's going to be unveiled, is Jesus Christ. So Jesus, when it talks about the Lamb, that's the Lamb who was slain because Jesus was killed for our sins and rose on the third day and ascended into heaven. So when we look at this scene, when it talks about the Lamb, that's Jesus. And there's 7 seals. The first 4 seals, the seals we're going to talk about today, are what many of us have heard. Even if you've never heard about the Bible, you hear about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There's lots of TV shows and movies and songs about it. I really was tempted to play a little Johnny Cash this morning, but it was out of context with it. There's first 4 seals are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so we read the first one, that it's a rider on a white horse. He's dressed in white, he's holding a bow, he's wearing a crown. And when we think about that, when a general used to come in and conquer you, a lot of times other forces, military forces, have come out and have conquered, but the general's going to come in and officially conquer you. And the general would often wear white and be on a white horse. It was kind of symbolic. When the general came in, he came in as a conqueror. And so he had a crown on his head. Now, we said a few weeks ago that back when the Greeks did the Olympics in olden times, they didn't have the gold, silver, and bronze medallions. They wore crowns. They were made out of flowers and whatnot, but they had a crown, and that meant you were the victor. We still have that language today. We crown someone the victor. So this rider on this first horse, the white horse, he rides in with a crown because he's victorious. He's wearing the white horse, which was the symbol of victory. And he's carrying a bow. Now, if we go back to Genesis chapter 6 and say, wait, the bow was hung up. God destroyed the earth with his rain bow, and the bow was hung up. He says, I'm not going to use that anymore. And he did say that about water. I'm not going to use my rain bow anymore. But that doesn't mean that's the only weapon he has available, remember. So the other day, my youngest daughter, my 4-year-old, will be 5 here, not too long, it's hard to believe. My youngest daughter, she's walking through the house, and she just starts saying 2 Peter, 2 Peter, 2 Peter. And I don't know why she's saying it. Now, she had watched a little cartoon about Peter Rabbit, but there's only one Peter Rabbit, so I'm still not understanding why she's saying 2 Peter. And I'm kind of tossing this around in my mind all day as I'm doing stuff. She's following me around saying 2 Peter, 2 Peter. I thought, well, maybe God's trying to tell me something. So I turned to 2 Peter chapter 3, and this is what I found in 2 Peter chapter 3, which is in your notes. Above all, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. They will say, where is this coming he promised? Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. But they deliberately forgot that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. By these waters also the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of the ungodly. Now, it's interesting who God will use to send you a message sometimes, isn't it? So the first rider has arrived with a bow. And he isn't bringing a flood, but likely he's bringing fire. Now, I wonder if our passage in Revelation says anything else about fire. We go to verse 3 of chapter 6. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, come. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. So yeah, the second horse is a fiery red one. He comes in with a weapon too. And his weapon is not just about stabbing people. Yes, he has a sword, But we don't read here. Yes, he has that sword. He ran out and he started stabbing people. No, his sword is to divide and conquer, to divide people up. Even Christians, to divide us and remove our unity. I was listening the other day to, it was a podcast that was talking about the Celtic Holocaust, because I'm a history nerd like that. But this is where Julius Caesar led armies to kill the Celtic people. If you have any Scottish heritage, maybe you have read this somewhere. But Julius Caesar is leading these armies. He's doing it through a lot of politics and through a lot of conquering. He's going to conquer the Celtic people. Now, that is a large group of people. Basically, his rule of thumb, when he's talking about this, he says, who are the Celtic people? Well, if you think you're Celtic, you're Celtic. Because there were so many people scattered out, kind of a tribe of people. And yes, he conquered some of them. He might go over here to this territory and conquer, but sometimes he'd get people to make a deal with him. And he'd go into a territory and he'd give them the chance to surrender. Say, you're going to be Romans now. You're going to live under Rome. You're going to give tribute to Rome. You're going to have Roman culture. You're going to worship the Roman gods. You're going to do all the Roman stuff. You're under Rome now. And if not, then I'm going to kill you all. And so sometimes the leaders of that place would kind of volunteer. They would welcome in Caesar. They say, well, we don't want to be killed. We're going to welcome in Caesar. And so we have these scenes where Julius Caesar is meeting with the heads of these different clans of Celtic people. And yes, there are people that resist, but then you've got somebody going up to Caesar and whispering in his ear, hey, here my cousin over here is planning on attacking me. And you have people selling out their own family. People turning their back and backstabbing their own family to save their own skin. That doesn't happen today, right? And they're kind of snitching on each other to try to win favor with Rome and to try to put them in a more favorable situation. So they'd let themselves get taken over. They'd rat on their friends. They would make all of these concessions to Rome and give up their culture, give up who they were. And sometimes that was because your cousin over here you're not on speaking terms with and you want them wiped out. So you say, hey Caesar, let me tell you all the weaknesses of this guy over here so you can have Caesar vanquish your foe for you. Just as we've seen throughout history, this is why this is relevant, is just as we've seen in the Bible and we've seen in history before and after the Bible, when a conqueror comes, if you don't acquiesce to their way of living, they bring destruction. So a conqueror will come, like we saw that conqueror on the white horse, and he'll try to come and conquer. And that conqueror, that second rider on the red horse, will try to divide us. Say, what if I can divide them? What if I can have them snitch on each other? What if I can have a family torn apart? Do we have division in our communities, our families, and in our nation today? It's unreal how much division we have. We've had the modus operandi for some people today seems to be, if I disagree with you, I'm going to yell in your face, I'm going to kick you out of wherever you're at, I'm going to run you out of the street, I'm going to storm your house, I'm going to bang on the doors, I'm going to threaten you with violence. These are all, I'm just pulling these out of the news. I'm not making these things up. These are just things that have happened over the last few months that have been in the news about people being threatened at restaurants, at their homes, getting things thrown at them. We've had a lot of incidences where people have called 911 and waited for the police to arrive so they could ambush them, so they could attack the police. And people are marching in the street and chanting things about groups that they don't like. Things that we would have thought we were past. But now we're having these chants of, I don't like that group, I'm going to call them ugly names, I'm going to threaten violence to them, and I'm going to, out in the streets and on Twitter and on the news, I'm going to say all these things I'd like to do to my enemy. It's strange how much division we have in our nation today. People are divided over socioeconomic status. There's the haves and the have-nots. People are divided over race. People are divided over political opinions. And instead of seeking first to understand and then to be understood, that's the way we should move and progress, is we seek to understand the other person and then to be understood. Instead of building bridges of understanding, instead of saying that there is a problem, let's see what all of our different perspectives are on that problem. It's not just one answer. Sometimes there's multiple answers to a problem, and we can value other people's input. Instead of saying all of that, The rhetoric seems to be, let's just do everything we can to sow further division. That very much sounds like the rider on that second horse, doesn't it? You may not realize it, but there is persecution of Christians all over the world. We're very safe in our nation, and there's other nations that are safe too. But there are more and more, increasingly so, Christians who are persecuted for their faith. They may be killed, or at a minimum, they may lose their job. They may not have a seat in the market, so to speak. And that was something that was happening in the book of Revelation. If you were a Christian, then they wouldn't allow you into the marketplace sometimes. You can't sell your goods here. So how are you going to make a living? You're a farmer, you've got a big wagon full of corn or whatever it is, and say, oh wait, you're a Christian. No, you have no place here. So how are you going to make a living? How are you going to continue to live? If they didn't outright kill you, they would diminish you to the point where you're barely getting by. So as the rhetoric in our nation today continues to be sowing seeds of division, our job as Christians is, even though other people might try to put us out of the market, might try to shun us, because persecution is coming to America eventually, maybe slowly but surely, our job is to sow those seeds of love and mercy. While the enemy is sowing weeds and thorns and poison, while the enemy is trying to bring down the bar, our job as Christians is to continue to sow seeds of love and mercy, of grace and compassion. Let it be said, those Christians over there, man, those are the most loving people. I would never do anything to them. Man, all they've ever done is love me. All they've ever done is they bring me in and treat me as part of the family. So our job as Christians, until that day comes, is to sow the seeds of God's kingdom and to continue to water those and to reap the harvest in God's proper time, to overcome hatred with love. As we go to verse 5 in Revelation 6, when the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. Now the third horse is black, which if you think about what does black mean from a scientific principle, it meant the absence of light. So it's symbolically here, this deals with the absence of light. It deals with taking away something. It deals with poverty, is what this symbol in particular is mentioning. If you go through here, and this kind of confused me a little bit when I was reading back through it, and I've read this a dozen times, but you forget things. So what is he talking about? This random guy's talking about 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. But what this is saying was Christians in those days, and this happens in other countries, and this will happen here, is that Christians were being persecuted, and they weren't making as much money as the non-Christians. So when it talks about barley here, you had different types of payments per person. Barley was considered poor people's food. Barley was what you gave to people who didn't have much. And I just imagine that as the wagon's coming by and your payment for the day is somebody's just got your bag of barley and they just kind of toss it in the house. Just kind of slam it against the front door. But here it says, do not damage the oil and the wine. So they're coming out and they're giving payment to all the workers. And you got the food that's barely edible. And you've only got enough to survive for the day. So you've got just enough barley to live on for that day. So you're literally living hand to mouth. And there it says, do not damage the oil and the wine. So they take their wagon a little bit further, and they go through the nice gates, and they go up to this person's house who's not a Christian, who gets a lot more money. And they've got the little basket with the oil and the wine wrapped in cloths, and it's a little bow tied on it. It's like, well, here you go. Here's your payment, sir. And the non-Christians in the time of this writing were getting treated a whole lot better than the Christians were. And that, again, that happens all over the world, all the time, right now. And there's a real chance of it happening here. It's just a matter of when. And depending on what culture you are in the United States, some people might argue, oh, it's happening now in this town or this town. We're very blessed, especially here in the South, in the Bible Belt. We don't have to worry about those things as much. But we can't grow complacent. We have to continue to sow those seeds of love and hopefully put off the day of that persecution. And hopefully when that persecution arrives here, we will have sown enough love, we'll have shown God's kingdom so passionately that maybe we can slow this down a little bit, at least until people are saved. I firmly believe Jesus is waiting to return until that last person is saved. So we've got to continue to plant those seeds and win people to the gospel as much as possible. Right now it's a lot easier because someone's not going to kill you for spreading the gospel. But the day will come when it's not so easy. Well, why not win our neighbors to Christ now while we don't have those challenges ahead of us? The message is that the world is going to treat the non-Christians a certain way, and the Christians are going to get treated a much worse way. Going to verse 7. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Now the word used here for pale means like a sickly green and a decomposing corpse gray. So the horse looks like it has been dead and is decomposing. Its name is Death, and it looks like death. If you just imagine a horse that looked like it had been some kind of zombified horse, you'd say that's what it looks like. It's this creepy, disturbing thing when you see it. Now, up to now, we've been talking about the destruction that comes after the Christians, but this destruction seems like it's meant for everybody. Whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, it seems like this destruction hits everybody. There's going to be famine. There's going to be plague. There's going to be death by wild animals. I don't think I had seen that before when I had gone over this passage, but now I'm looking back over this and say, death by wild animals, what will that look like? No more jungle safari tours on vacation. What is that going to look like? It's going to be a horrible time. Now, do people die on a massive level today due to plagues? Yes. Now, in this nation, we've wiped out a lot of diseases. Some of them are coming back. That's strange. But in other countries, people are wiped out by all kinds of diseases all the time. And we've had, in our own history, we can look back and we say we've had the plague, we've had different diseases in our past, and fortunately, a lot of those things are gone. But you hear all the time about E. coli breakouts in certain foods. You couldn't get romaine lettuce anymore. That's why I don't eat salad, because I'm just being safe. I'm just theorizing here, and I don't know if the wicked will have it any worse than the believers at this particular part of the apocalypse. I don't know, but this is just something that occurred to me as I was looking at this. If the Christians are eating the poor people's food, okay? The Christians, they're not going out there eating a variety of food. In this passage, and in the future, it seems, the Christians are eating the poor people's food that's been given to them by the government or whatever. And the rich people are having a lot larger variety of the oil and the wine. They're getting the finest foods. And disease is about to come. Isn't it possible that a food-borne disease could come that only affects the people that have the access to that kind of food? Isn't it strange to think that as disease comes, and disease and plague and all that may affect the Christians just as much as the very rich, well-to-do non-Christians, but isn't it worth considering that God might hit them a little bit harder? And the non-Christian, the Christians say, well, I didn't get that food-borne illness. I would have loved to have that kind of food, but I didn't have access to it, so I didn't get it. So it's just something to consider, that I don't know the extent to which the Christians will have it versus the non-Christians. It's worth considering that God can find ways to make the wicked have it much worse than the Christians do during that particular time. Now, there are those that believe that God will rapture, meaning God will come back for the Christians and take us up to heaven before any of this bad stuff happens. There are those that believe that some of this bad stuff will happen while the Christians are still here, and then the Christians are raptured up in the middle of it. And then some people think that the rapture happens at the end of all of this. Like as one of y'all have shared with me before, you said you were a panmillennialist, meaning it'll all pan out. The answer to that, if you were to ask me the question, well, when will God rapture up the believers? Will we Will we miss all of this stuff that happens, or will we be raptured up in the middle of all of it happening, or will we be raptured up in the end? My answer to you is that I don't really know. I certainly have my ideas, but I cannot say with certainty. What I can say is that when Jesus was on earth and he was sharing with his disciples all of these things that were going to happen in Matthew 24:36, and the disciples want to get a timetable from him, which wouldn't you, if you had a chance to talk to Jesus about the end of the world? You say, can I mark it on my calendar? Let's get an order of events. Let me mark it on my calendar. I want to be prepared for this. Let me go ahead and stockpile some food. Let me know not to go to certain places at certain times. I want to get it on the calendar. But they ask him, when's all this supposed to happen? And he says that even the Son of Man, while he was on earth, did not know the day or the hour. That even Jesus, I don't know when it's going to happen. When the Father tells me. And I know this part isn't exactly a biblical image, but I always picture Jesus on the running blocks. I just picture him on the starting line, waiting for that pistol to be fired. And I know that's not in the text here, but I just imagine, just the metaphor my mind goes to, is that I imagine Jesus is just about ready to bust out in a run. When the last person's saved and God the Father says, go, I just imagine he's about to bust loose into our world and to bring all the Christians up with him to meet him in the air. Again, that's not, the scripture doesn't say in 2 Opinions chapter 3, go here, this is the metaphor, but this is just what pops into my mind, is that I think that Jesus, as soon as that last person is saved, he's coming back for us. So will the Christians see this kind of destruction we've been talking about, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? I don't know. Will you see this in your lifetime? Will this all happen? Is it already happening? We've seen the devil try to conquer the world. We've seen division in our world. You could make an argument to say, well, some of this might already be happening. Or the seeds for this kind of stuff has already been sown. Maybe we are in the final days. Maybe he's going to return today. Maybe it's just a little while from now. In the grand scheme of things, it is just a little while from now. In view of eternity, I don't know when it's going to happen, and it's not up for me to know exactly when it's going to happen. What I do know from what God tells us in the book of Revelation, from what he tells us through the whole Bible, particularly in the Gospels, I think about the parable of the widows with their oil that were lighting candles, waiting for the king, waiting for the groom to come, and they're basically making a runway out of candles, out of lamplight, I should say. And some of them are prepared and some of them are not. What I get from the context of all of this is, it's not for us to know the day and the hour and to mark it down on our calendar and know exactly when it's going to happen. The point is for us to be ready for it at any time. That God could come today, he could come tomorrow, he could come in your lifetime. It might be your children or your great-grandchildren. We don't know. We have no idea. And then we're not supposed to know. I think if we knew we had another 50 years, we'd probably say, man, I can get away with whatever I want to for 50 years, and for 49 years, and that 50th year, man, I will really buckle down. I think God leaves it a mystery on purpose. You may have heard people ask the question before, if Jesus was to return tomorrow, what would you be doing? What would you be in the middle of? Would you be ashamed of it? The way that you're living your life, would you say, ooh, man, I wish he hadn't walked in on that part? Or would you say, I'm glad that I was serving God, not perfectly, but I was serving God to the best of my ability when he came, when he saw me. We could be in the end times, I don't know. But the message that we saw in Genesis, Noah, destruction's coming, get ready. The message we see at the very end in Revelation, John, destruction's coming, get ready. That's the message for us today. It's not just for them in the Bible in that time, it's a message for us today. That you, brother and sister, destruction's coming, get ready. We don't know when it'll be. There's a lot of symbolism in this book, like I said. If you jump in the middle of it, you're still going to be just as confused. We may not have a full understanding, and I don't think that we can wrap our minds around all that God has prepared for us. He has put things in terms that we can sort of understand, but I think when we get to heaven, things are going to be so much broader than our understanding. Say, there's no way you could have explained this to me that would have made sense. But the signs are all around. It's like if you had a tea kettle, and you're waiting for the tea kettle to boil. You can't boil water when you're looking at it, right? When you're looking at water to boil, it just won't boil, right? It seems that way. But you know that moment right before the tea kettle makes that sound, when it makes that whistle, when it starts to make that noise, right? You can hear the water bubbling inside of it. You start to hear the air escaping. We could very well be in that moment. The tea kettle hasn't made its whistle. We haven't heard that loud sound that fills the whole kitchen. But we know the water is bubbling over. We can see the signs. We know, we can hear that air starting to escape. We know it's just a moment now, just a moment. We don't know when Jesus will return, but we know it's just a moment before he does. And destruction may hit the Christian just as much. It seems to us anyway. It might feel like we're getting it just as bad as the non-believer. But believe me, destruction for the non-believer will be far worse than it is for the believer. What happens to the non-Christian? Because ultimately, at some point, God is taking us away from this. At what point in the line, I don't know. But ultimately, at some point, God is taking his own away from destruction. So, in the meantime, stand up for what's right. Be on the side of God. There will be justice for those who have sacrificed for God. And we're going to talk about that next time. But in the meantime, as we've been talking about what God has been doing and what he is preparing to do, you might feel led to respond to what God is doing in your heart this morning. Perhaps if you've looked at what he's done throughout history, and you see that he's going to do it again. History repeats itself. If you see what he's going to do again, you might feel led to join the family of God by accepting Jesus' sacrifice for your sins. You might say to yourself, I know I can't get myself to heaven. And the world can't get me to heaven. If you'd love to come to know Jesus today, I'd love to talk to you. I'll be standing right over here. If you'd like to talk to me, I'll love to talk to you and pray with you. You may not want to pray with me. You want to pray by yourself here at this kneeling bench. You can kneel down there. You can stand and pray. However it is that God leads you in your heart. As we've talked about the end of time, you might be going through some things in your life that say, this might not be the end of the world, but it's the end of my world. It's the end of everything I do. You might want to pray for that. You may want to pray for a loved one. Perhaps you'd like to join this church in membership. We're people who stick together through thick and through thin, however long it takes until the Lord comes. However the Lord leads you, I pray that you'll come forward as we sing this final song.